Kieran O'Malley didn't expect the sky to crack open the second she stepped out of the office building. 1 second, the pavement was dry. The next, it was pouring like the universe had been holding its breath all day just to soak her. Of course, she'd forgotten her umbrella in the back seat of her town car along with her driver, because she'd insisted on walking 2 blocks to clear her mind. Now, soaked through her white blouse, Kieran stood at the corner bus stop with rain dripping from her hair into her eyes, trying to pretend she didn't care that she looked like a drowned cat. She didn't belong here. Not in this neighborhood, not at this bus stop, and certainly not in this weather. But that's when he showed up. He jogged toward the shelter of the bus stop at full speed, a navy blue hoodie pulled over his head, one hand gripping a tiny pink backpack. And beside him, a little girl in yellow rain boots stomped through puddles like it was the best day of her life. "Faye, wait up," he called, breathless, as he caught up and scooped her into his arms. "I told you, no puddle jumping until after we get home, remember?" The little girl giggled like she didn't hear a word he said. Kieran blinked rain from her lashes. The man looked down at her, startled to find they weren't alone. "Oh, sorry," he said, brushing wet hair from his forehead. "Didn't mean to crowd you." "It's okay," Kieran replied, hugging her arms around herself. "I'm just waiting." "For the bus?" he asked, eyebrows lifting. She nodded. He hesitated, then extended the large umbrella he'd just pulled from his backpack over both of them. "You're shivering." "Here, I'm fine," she said quickly, but her lips were already turning blue. He didn't move. "Look, I'm not trying to be weird. It's just, you're soaked and I've got room under here. I promise I won't bite." Kieran let out a soft, reluctant laugh. "All right." They stood together under the umbrella, and it felt strangely quiet despite the rain pounding around them. She glanced at him as he adjusted the umbrella to make sure she was covered. He had strong hands, worn leather sneakers, faint stubble along his jaw. The kind of guy who looked like he fixed things with his hands and always had a tool belt nearby, not her type, not even close. "I'm Graham," he said after a moment, "and this is Faye." Faye beamed up at her. "You look like a princess," Kieran smiled, caught off guard. "Thank you, Faye." "That's very sweet." "You do," Graham said, looking at her more closely now. "Like you stepped out of one of those perfume ads. Fancy blouse, heels, the whole thing. You're not from around here, are you?" Kieran hesitated. "Not really." He didn't press, just nodded like he already knew. The bus didn't come, not after 10 minutes, not after 15. Graham checked his watch, frustrated. "Figures, they're probably late again. Faye's preschool is across town and we missed our usual route. I swear they never run on time when you need them." Kieran tilted her head. "You take the bus every day." "Yeah." He gave her a sideways look. "You don't?" She hesitated. "Not usually," he chuckled. "Didn't think so." Kieran felt her cheeks warm. "I just needed a walk." "From where?" "Work." He waited, but she didn't say more. "Bad day?" he asked gently. She looked away. "Something like that." The rain poured harder like it was trying to make the day worse on purpose. "Well, lucky for you, I make a mean grilled cheese," Graham said suddenly. "If this bus doesn't show up in 2 minutes, I'm bailing and walking home with Faye." "You're welcome to come along, dry off, warm up." Kieran stared at him. "You're inviting a total stranger to your home, you're soaked and freezing, and you've got kind eyes." Kieran blinked. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you didn't roll your eyes when my daughter called you a princess. That counts for something." Faye tugged on Graham's sleeve. "Can she come, Daddy, please?" Kieran swallowed hard. "Just for a bit. Until the rain slows." "Cool," Graham said and offered his hand. "Come on." They walked together, the three of them huddled under the umbrella, soaked shoes slapping wet sidewalks, and Kieran felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, normal, human. Warm, the apartment was small but cozy. Faye ran inside first and kicked off her boots. Graham tossed his hoodie on a hook near the door and offered her a towel. "You really don't have to stop," he said, handing it to her firmly. "You're shivering. Sit." She sat. The grilled cheese was exactly as promised, crispy, buttery, perfect. Faye showed her a drawing she made of a unicorn wearing sunglasses, and Graham made her laugh when he accidentally burned the second sandwich. "So what do you do?" he asked as they sat at the tiny kitchen table. Kieran hesitated, then shrugged. "Consulting." "Ah, mysterious." She sipped her tea. "What about you?" "Auto repair." "I run a small shop a few blocks down. It's nothing fancy, but it keeps the lights on." She smiled. Sounds like a lot of work. It is, but it pays for daycare and dinosaur pajamas and grilled cheese. She laughed softly. He smiled back. Something shifted, then something warm and easy and quiet, and for the first time in weeks, Kieran felt her chest loosen. I should go, she said, standing reluctantly. The rain's letting up. Graham nodded. Let me walk you back. You've already done more than enough. He stepped closer. You sure? She looked up at him, heart doing something strange. Yeah, I'm sure. He walked her to the door. Faye hugged her legs. Bye, princess. Kieran smiled. Bye, sweetheart. Graham leaned against the doorframe, watching her. If you ever need another umbrella, I'm around. She paused. Thanks, Graham, he grinned. Anytime. Kieran stepped out into the street, the air crisp and clean after the storm. She didn't look back, but she smiled the whole walk back to her penthouse. The following Tuesday, Graham was elbow-deep in a radiator when he heard the bell over the garage door jingle. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out from under the lifted hood, expecting a parts delivery or maybe one of the regulars dropping by to complain about the weather. Instead, she was standing there, Kieran. Not a hint of rain this time, just sunlight catching the edge of her sunglasses and a structured blazer that looked like it cost more than his monthly rent. She held a paper bag in one hand and wore an expression that danced somewhere between uncertainty and amusement. You get a lot of surprise visits from women you rescued at bus stops, she asked. Graham blinked. Only when I'm lucky. Kieran held out the bag. I brought lunch. Figured I owed you something for saving me from pneumonia. He took it, still stunned. You didn't have to, I know. She slid her sunglasses to the top of her head. But I wanted to. Graham gestured toward the folding chairs outside the garage bay. You okay sitting next to a beat-up toolbox and a stack of tires? She shrugged. I've sat through worse board meetings. They ate on mismatched metal chairs, the scent of oil and sun warmed concrete hanging in the air. She'd brought gourmet sandwiches from a deli he'd only seen once, driving past it on his way to pick up parts in the next city over. The bread had some kind of herbed crust, and the meat tasted like it had been flown in from Europe. He wasn't sure if he should be impressed or suspicious. You didn't mention you lived in a building with a doorman, he said after a moment. Kieran raised an eyebrow. You followed me. No, but when you walked up the street that night, I kept watching to make sure you didn't get mugged, saw you go in. She looked down at her sandwich. That was considerate. You always dress like that, even on your days off, she smirked faintly. You're wearing a shirt with your name stitched on it. Touché. They ate in silence for a moment. A car drove by, music thumping. Graham took another bite, then glanced at her. Why'd you really come? Kieran licked a trace of mustard from her thumb and tilted her head. You want the polite answer or the honest one? Honest. She leaned back. I couldn't stop thinking about you. Graham blinked. Me, you and Faye and that grilled cheese, and how weirdly welcome I felt in a place I'd never been before. She looked at him. It was the first time in a long time I didn't feel like I was being measured. He studied her. Measured for what? For what I'm worth. He didn't respond right away. A small breeze stirred the edge of her blazer. I'm not great with people who have walls, he said finally. I like straight talk, no games. And what about secrets? She asked. He met her gaze. Everyone's got those. I just want to know if they're the kind that hurt. Kieran's smile faded. She looked away. Mine might. He didn't push. Just nodded and finished his sandwich. An hour later, she was still there, asking about how he'd gotten into car repair and how old Faye had been when she started calling every screw a twisty. She laughed with her whole face, and when she leaned forward to listen, she gave him her full attention. No phone, no half glances toward the street. When a customer pulled in with a rattling sedan, Kieran stood. I should go, she said. Let you get back to work. You can stay, he offered. She smiled like that surprised her more than it should have. Maybe next time. He didn't ask when that would be. She didn't offer, but 3 days later she was back. This time she brought Faye a picture book and a box of lemon poppy seed muffins. Faye climbed into her lap like they'd known each other for years, pointing at the drawings and making up whole new stories for the characters. Graham watched from across the room, heart twisting in a way he didn't expect. That night, after Faye was in bed, Kieran stayed behind to help him sort invoices. She was better at it than he expected. correcting a misfiled order number with a quiet smirk and a sharp eye. Somewhere around the third folder, she said, "You know, you have a really strange way of making people feel safe." Graham glanced up. "Strange how? You don't ask for anything," he shrugged. "Why would I? Most men I know lead with what they want." "I don't have time for that," he said. "I've got a kid, a shop, and a reputation to keep clean." She hesitated, then said softly, "What about what you need?" He didn't answer. She left not long after, but the silence she left behind lingered like perfume. By the following week, it became a pattern. She'd show up on days when the shop was quiet or when Faye's preschool let out early. Sometimes she brought pastries. Sometimes she brought nothing at all, but she always brought herself sharp, curious, guarded around the edges and yet softening. Then Thursday came. The one where he walked into the garage bay and found her standing there, holding Faye's hand, both of them looking like they'd just stepped off a movie set. "What's going on?" he asked, tossing a wrench onto the workbench. Kieran lifted her chin. "I was hoping you'd come with us." "To what?" "An art show, downtown. It's for kids. Interactive. Faye gets to paint on the walls." He looked down at his grease-stained shirt, then at Faye's hopeful face. "I should clean up." "I brought you clothes," Kieran said, holding up a neatly folded button-down and dark jeans. "I guessed your size." He stared at her. "Before you say no," she added, "Faye already picked out her colors. If you don't come, she'll probably paint a car instead." He changed. The gallery was nothing like he expected. High ceilings, open space, and soft music playing under the laughter of children running wild with paintbrushes. Kieran stood beside him as Faye dipped her fingers into blue and smeared a smiley face across a canvas taller than she was. "You're good with people," he said, watching her interact with the other parents like she belonged here. Kieran didn't look at him. "I learned how to blend in." "Where?" She hesitated. "Prep school, then business school, then boardrooms." He studied her. "You don't like any of those things," he said. "I like results, I like building things, but the rest," she shook her head. "I think I forgot how to enjoy anything that doesn't have an end goal." "Except this," he said gently, watching Faye swirl purple into orange. Kieran smiled. "Except this." That night they walked back toward the subway together, Faye asleep in Graham's arms, her cheek pressed against his shoulder. Kieran glanced at him. "You ever think about someone you barely know and feel like they already fit in your life?" He shifted Faye slightly. "All the time lately." She stopped walking. He turned. "What?" Kieran looked at him for a long moment, then said, "There's something you should know." He waited, but she didn't say it. Instead, she kissed him, soft, unsure, then certain. The city moved around them, taxis passing, strangers talking, but none of it touched them. Just her mouth on his, her fingers curled in the front of his jacket, and the quiet, aching truth that had been building between them. When they finally pulled apart, she whispered, "I wasn't supposed to want this." Graham looked into her eyes. "Then don't fight it." She didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. Graham leaned against the edge of the balcony, the city glowing beneath them in fractured amber light. Kieran stood beside him, arms crossed against the early spring chill, as if she weren't sure what to do with her hands or her heart. She hadn't planned to bring him up here. It wasn't part of the plan, then again. Nothing about Graham had ever been part of any plan she'd made. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm thinking about," she looked out at the skyline, "whether I've completely lost my mind." Graham didn't flinch. "Well, you brought me to the top floor of a building with marble floors and brushed gold elevator buttons, so I'd say we passed normal 6 stories ago." Kieran turned slowly. "I wanted to explain before you heard it from someone else." "Go ahead." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her throat worked as she chose her words. "My name is Kieran Vale. My family owns Vale Industries. We design and manufacture sustainable infrastructure systems across 5 continents. I'm the acting CEO." Graham didn't move. "Okay," she stared. "Okay, you thought I'd freak out." "I wasn't sure," she admitted. "Most people do." "I'm not most people." "No," she said quietly. "You're not." He didn't ask why she'd hidden it. Instead, he walked past her into the penthouse, his boots echoing softly on the polished floor. The space was all clean lines and modern art, but not cold. It felt lived in barely but enough. A silk scarf tossed over the back of a chair. A book with a cracked spine left open beside a glass of water. "You live here alone?" he asked. She nodded, following him in. 15 floors up, no neighbors on either side, it's quiet. Too quiet? She hesitated, then nodded once. Sometimes. Graham glanced at her. So why me? What do you mean? I'm not rich. I don't wear cufflinks. I go to work with grease on my hands and come home to a 6-year-old who thinks macaroni is a food group. I didn't fall for your resume, Graham. He looked at her carefully. Then what? She drew a breath. Because you make me feel like I don't have to perform. Because you don't ask what I can give you, or who I know, or which board I sit on. Because you see me. Graham stepped closer. And what do you see when you look at me? Someone who doesn't flinch when I show up uninvited, who remembers the way I take my tea. Who built a life out of something solid, even when it wasn't easy. He reached for her then, slow and deliberate, his hand brushing the side of her face. I don't care about the penthouse, Kieran. I care about you. Her eyes went glossy, but she didn't blink. You should care about what comes with me. Try me. She didn't answer. Instead, she kissed him again, this time slower. Her fingers slipped into the back of his shirt, and he folded her into his arms like he'd been waiting to do it for weeks. The next morning, sunlight streamed over the kitchen's marble counters as Graham poured 2 mugs of coffee. Faye was still asleep in the guest room. Kieran had insisted she take after their impromptu evening of movie marathons and chocolate chip pancakes. Kieran padded barefoot into the kitchen, her hair damp from the shower, wearing a robe that looked like it belonged in a Parisian spa. You're up early, she said. Someone had to make coffee. You don't even own a regular machine. She grinned. I have an espresso bar. He held up the French press. This is the only part I trust. They sat on the balcony again, this time in soft morning silence. Kieran tucked her knees beneath her, sipping slowly. You ever think about leaving all this? He asked. Sometimes. Then I remember why I stay. Which is legacy, responsibility, the people who depend on the company. It's more than just money, it's a machine that feeds thousands of families. Graham nodded. That's not nothing. No, she said, but sometimes I wonder what it would feel like to disappear. Just for a while, be someone else. You could, he said. You already were. She glanced sideways at him. You're not mad. I'm not thrilled you lied, he said, voice steady. But I get why you did. I'm more interested in what you want to do now. I want to stop hiding. He leaned back in the chair. Then don't. They spent the weekend together. Not in the way most people would spend it in a penthouse, but with Faye dragging them to a rooftop garden exhibit, Graham carrying her on his shoulders while Kieran tried to explain the difference between a bonsai and a topiary. They ate tacos from a food truck, and Kieran spilled salsa on her designer dress without blinking. Hours passed like minutes, and when they returned to the apartment, Faye was fast asleep in his arms. Kieran opened the door softly. You can put her in the same room, he nodded, walking past her. When he came back, she was standing by the window, arms folded. I'm scared, she said. Of me? Of what this could be, of how fast it's moving, of what happens when the real world catches up. He stepped behind her, resting his hands on her hips. Then let's not let it catch up. She turned. You think that's possible? I think anything is if we stop pretending we're not already in deep. She didn't argue. That night, they stayed up talking about her childhood at boarding school, his first apartment with plumbing that rattled when it rained, about the time Faye tried to flush a paintbrush and flooded the kitchen. They laughed, but it wasn't light. It was grounding. Graham finally said, You know, I was engaged once. Kieran blinked. I didn't know that. It was years ago. Faye was still in diapers. Her mom left before she was born, and I figured it was time to settle down, find someone who'd help raise her, but I rushed it. Tried to build something on shaky ground. What happened? She left. Said she didn't sign up to be a mother so soon. I never blamed her, but I made a promise after that I wouldn't bring anyone into Faye's life unless I was sure. Kieran looked at him, her voice quiet. And now, I'm sure. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for his. I don't know what happens next. We don't need to, one day at a time. She leaned into him, and they stood like that until the city outside dimmed. The next morning came with a different kind of storm. Kieran's phone rang just after sunrise. She answered quickly, voice clipped. Yes, Graham sat up in bed, watching her expression harden. What do you mean there's an inquiry? She barked. No, I didn't authorize that transfer. Put it on hold. She hung up and turned toward the window, jaw tight. Graham sat up. Everything all right? She didn't answer immediately. There's a board meeting in 48 hours, she said finally. Someone's trying to force a vote to have me removed. He stood. Why? Because I've been distracted. Because I refused a merger that would have gutted our environmental protections. Because I make enemies when I don't bend. He crossed the room. What do you need? She looked up, startled. What do you need from me? Kieran swallowed. I don't know. I've always handled things alone. You're not alone now. She stared at him, then reached for her phone again. I have to go to the office. Then I'll drive you, she hesitated. You don't have to, I know. But I want to. They left together, the world already starting to shift beneath their feet. But they didn't let go. Not yet. Not when everything was finally starting to matter. The boardroom chilled like a meat locker, though the thermostat claimed it was 72. Kieran stood at the head of the table, spine straight, voice sharp, surrounded by men in suits who pretended to be allies while sharpening knives beneath the surface. The vote hadn't been called yet, but the air thrummed with tension. She'd walked in alone, but she wasn't alone anymore. Graham waited beyond the glass wall in the executive lounge, dressed in a clean black button-down and jeans, holding a leather notebook she'd given him that morning. He didn't belong in this world, not by background or circle, but as she glanced toward the door, their eyes met and she drew strength from it. Miss Vale, said Gregory Langdon, the oldest member of the board, his salt and pepper hair as impeccable as his disdain. We've reviewed your recent decisions. The stalled merger, the rejected buyout offers, and most curiously, your absence from the Zurich summit. A pattern is forming, one that suggests emotional compromise. Kieran didn't flinch. I declined Zurich because it was a photo op, not a strategic necessity. And I rejected the merger because it would have outsourced our clean water initiative to a company with 6 EPA violations in 3 countries. Your role requires objectivity, said another voice, Ili Chen, her father's former protege. Not personal crusades. This isn't personal, she said, keeping her voice even. It's responsible stewardship. You all know my track record. I've increased our year-over-year growth by 21%, cut waste by 40%, and tripled our investment in renewable infrastructure. Langdon leaned forward. And yet your personal life has become a matter of office gossip. A mechanic, is it? A single father, no less. She stared him down. Graham is none of your business. It becomes our business when it clouds your judgment. Kieran's fingers curled against the lacquered table. You're not questioning my performance. You're questioning my control. Langdon opened his mouth again, but the door behind them opened before he could speak. Graham stepped inside, calm and unapologetic. I told the secretary not to interrupt, Langdon barked. I'm not here to interrupt, Graham said evenly. I'm here to listen. And to speak if you'll allow it. Kieran stood frozen, heart lurching. Graham, he met her eyes. You said they needed to see the truth, so I'm here, Langdon scoffed. This is highly irregular. No more than trying to oust someone without cause, Graham replied. But sure, let's talk about irregular. He turned to the board. I'm not from this world. I fix cars. I raise my daughter. I don't know quarterly reports or international partnerships, but I know what integrity looks like. I know what it means to show up when it's hard and stay when it's easiest to run. He looked directly at Langdon. Kieran doesn't hide behind power. She uses it to build, to protect people who don't have voices in rooms like this. If you think loving someone who lives differently than she does makes her unfit to lead, then maybe you're the ones who don't belong at the table. The room fell into a stunned silence. Kieran's chest burned. She didn't move. Langdon cleared his throat. This is absurd. One of the younger board members, a woman named Dana who had rarely spoken at past meetings, leaned forward. Actually, it's the most honest thing I've heard in this room all year. Others shifted in their seats. No one called for a vote. After the meeting dissolved, Kieran found Graham in the hallway, leaning against the wall like he hadn't just walked into a lion's den and spoken with fire in his throat. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know, he replied. She stared at him. You could have made everything worse. But I didn't. No, she whispered. You didn't. He stepped closer. Let them talk. Let them grumble. You're still standing. I'm not used to someone stepping in for me. Get used to it. She reached for his hand. They decided to leave the city for a weekend, not the Hamptons, not a yacht. Just a quiet lake house Graham used to visit with his uncle, tucked between cedar trees and silence. Faye ran through the grass barefoot, chasing dragonflies while Graham grilled corn on a rusted-out barbecue, and Kieran tried to figure out how to make a fire in the pit without Googling it. "You know," she said, holding up a lighter with pride, "this is wildly satisfying." "You're one spark away from setting your scarf on fire," he said, taking it from her. "It's cashmere. It'll burn elegantly." They sat beside the fire that night, Faye curled up in a blanket beside them, tired from swimming and marshmallows and naming every duck on the lake. Kieran watched the flames flicker. "I almost let them win, but you didn't. I was scared. I still am," he said. "I'm scared I'll mess this up, that I'll say the wrong thing, that I'll never fit into your world no matter how many ties I learn to tie." She turned to him. "I'm scared I'll lose this trying to protect it. Then let's stop protecting and just live it." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think I love you." He didn't move. "You think?" "I've never said it to someone who wasn't a blood relative." "Well," he murmured, "I'm flattered to be the first." She turned her face toward him. "And you?" "I knew the moment you showed up at my garage with overpriced sandwiches and a look like you were trying not to fall apart." Her lips parted. "You never said. I was waiting for you to be ready." They kissed, not like the first time tentative and questioning, but like the last piece sliding into place. Days passed in quiet bliss. But all stories circle back. When they returned to the city, a letter waited in her penthouse. It wasn't a threat, it was an invitation. The mayor's office was honoring her for her environmental initiatives, and they wanted her to attend the gala as the keynote speaker. She read the letter twice before setting it down. "Sounds like a big night," Graham said. "It is." Faye bounced on the couch beside them. "Do I get to wear sparkles?" Kieran smiled. "Absolutely." The night of the gala arrived. Graham wore a tuxedo, the collar slightly crooked until Kieran fixed it with a smile and a kiss. Faye wore a silver dress with a tulle skirt and sneakers because heels are for grown-ups. Kieran wore midnight blue, her hair swept into a low twist, her heels unapologetically high. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and soft jazz. Kieran stood at the podium, her voice steady as she thanked the city for its recognition. But when she paused, she turned toward Graham and Faye. "And lastly," she said, "to the two people who remind me every day why building a better world matters. Who teach me that love doesn't require perfection, just truth. Thank you for showing me who I am when I stop pretending." Applause thundered. Later, on the rooftop balcony, Graham pulled her close. "You were incredible. I was terrified. You didn't look it." She laughed softly. "You're the only man who's ever made me feel like I'm enough without having to prove it. You always were." They kissed under the stars, the city pulsing beneath them, not as a battlefield but as a home. Weeks passed, summer settled in. The garage thrived. Graham hired help. Kieran took weekends off. Faye colored blueprints on Kieran's office floor and called herself Junior CEO. One afternoon, Graham found Kieran in the kitchen, barefoot, humming something off-key while stirring a pot of tomato soup. He leaned in the doorway. "You ever think about getting married?" She turned, spoon in hand. "You propose often while I'm cooking. Only when the soup smells this good." She wiped her hands. "Was that a real question?" He stepped closer. "I've got a ring. It's not flashy, but it's real, like us." She stared at him. "You're serious?" "I've never been more." She didn't hesitate. "Yes." They married in the lakehouse garden, surrounded by wildflowers and dragonflies and the people who mattered. No press, no headlines, just promises whispered beneath cedar trees. Kieran Vale, CEO of an empire, and Graham Carter, single father turned husband, sealed their vows with a kiss while Faye threw rose petals and yelled, "Finally!" And the world didn't fall apart, it just became theirs. The morning sun filtered through the gauzy curtains of the lakehouse bedroom, casting soft amber lines across the wooden floors and rumpled sheets. Kieran sat at the edge of the bed, pulling on a pair of faded jeans she'd stolen from Graham's side of the closet weeks ago. Outside the window, Faye's giggles floated in from the lake, accompanied by the distant splash of water and Graham calling after her, warning about slippery rocks. Kieran didn't respond right away. She was too busy watching them through the open window. Graham standing knee-deep in the water, holding out a towel while Faye danced circles around him, her hair dripping, her joy uncontainable. She ran a hand through her tousled hair, then padded barefoot into the kitchen, where the scent of cinnamon and toasted almonds greeted her. The lake house had become more than a retreat. It had become a threshold, a place between what had been and what was becoming. Graham walked in with Faye still wrapped in the towel, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "She wants hot cocoa. I told her it's June," he said, nudging Faye's damp curls with his chin. "I said it's never too hot for cocoa," Faye countered, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Kieran opened the cabinet. "She's right." Graham raised an eyebrow. "You're siding with her again." "I'm outnumbered," she said, handing him the mix. "Besides, it's not about cocoa. You think she knows?" he asked quietly once Faye skipped off toward the living room to fetch her storybook. "She's too sharp not to," Kieran said, watching the little girl disappear around the corner. "She doesn't say it, but I feel it. She's waiting." He leaned against the counter. "For what?" "For the next chapter." That night, after Faye fell asleep in a nest of pillows and stuffed animals, Graham poured 2 glasses of wine and joined Kieran on the back porch, where lanterns flickered over the railing and the lake reflected nothing but stars. She took the glass, curled her legs beneath her, and said, "You've been quiet for days." "I've been thinking," he said, his voice lower than usual. She didn't press. "I used to think love was something that either fit or didn't," he continued, "like a key in a lock. But maybe it's more like building something from scratch. You get the pieces and you figure it out together." Kieran turned her head slowly. "Are you saying we still need instructions?" "I'm saying I want to keep building. With you." She set her glass down. "Tell me what you're really thinking." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, not new, but carefully kept. He opened it to reveal a ring with a delicate, vintage design. A single oval diamond set in a band of filigree that looked like it had a story to tell. "This was my grandmother's," he said. "She gave it to me before she passed, said to give it to the woman who made me feel like I'd found home." Kieran blinked once, slowly. Graham dropped to one knee on the porch, the boards creaking beneath him. "Marry me." "Not because it's the next step, but because I can't imagine another one without you. Because Faye already calls you the best part of her day. Because I wake up every morning and wonder how I ever breathed before you." Kieran's chest tightened. "You're sure?" "I've never been more." She didn't hesitate. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and she didn't stop the tears this time. She let them fall as she kissed him, as the lanterns swayed overhead and the lake whispered beneath them like it already knew their story would last. They didn't rush the wedding. There was no need for spectacle or headlines. Instead, they planned a ceremony in the garden behind the lake house, where wildflowers grew without permission, and the air always smelled faintly of pine and possibility. Faye insisted on writing her own speech, which she read aloud with great seriousness in front of the 30 guests. They invited people who mattered, and no one else. "I'm happy because now I have 2 people who love me more than ice cream," she declared. "And I think that's forever." Kieran wore a dress that moved like wind and hugged Graham's arm like it had always belonged there. They exchanged vows under a wooden arbor covered in honeysuckle, with no microphones or cameras. Just words from hearts that had been cracked and healed and learned to beat in time. "I used to think love was something you earned," Kieran said, her voice steady. "But you taught me it's something you give, freely, fiercely, and without condition." Graham took her hands. "I didn't know what home was until I watched you dance barefoot in my kitchen. Or when I saw you teaching Faye to braid her hair without even realizing you were changing the shape of her world." They kissed to thunderous applause, not because it was grand, but because it was real. Afterward, they danced barefoot in the grass while Faye twirled between them, the music spilling from a single speaker hooked up to Graham's phone. No press, no expectations, no masks, just them. Weeks later, they returned to the city, not as something new, but as something whole. Kieran walked into the Vale Industries boardroom wearing a sapphire band on her left hand, and a calm so complete it silenced the murmurs before they began. She didn't need to explain anything. She didn't owe anyone that. Instead, she presented a 5-year plan that expanded their initiatives into rural education and clean energy partnerships with underrepresented communities. When she finished, no one questioned her. They voted unanimously. After the meeting, she found Graham waiting outside, leaning against the back wall with a bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked from a rooftop garden. "I thought you hated elevators," she said. "I hate ones that smell like bleach and regret." "Yours just smells like victory." She took the flowers, laughing. "You're impossible. And yet you married me." They walked through the city hand in hand, Faye skipping ahead with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. They stopped at a corner cafe, where the barista already knew their names and had Faye's hot cocoa ready before she asked for it. As they sat outside beneath the striped awning, Graham reached for Kieran's hand across the table. "Remember the first time I saw you?" he asked. "You looked like a lost goddess in the middle of a rainstorm." Kieran raised an eyebrow. "I was soaked to the bone and arguing with a bus schedule, and I've never been more grateful for public transportation failing." She grinned. "And I've never been more grateful for a man who made grilled cheese without asking questions." They sat in easy silence as the city moved around them, horns honking, feet hurrying, lives pulsing in every direction, but their world was still, complete. Later that night, after Faye fell asleep with the same unicorn nightlight she refused to part with, Kieran and Graham stood on the balcony of their city apartment. The view stretched forever, but neither of them looked beyond the railing. "I never thought I'd feel this settled," she said. "You're not settled," he replied. "You're rooted." She turned toward him. "Same difference. No, settled means you gave up. Rooted means you grew." She leaned into his chest. "I like that version better." He wrapped his arms around her and kissed the top of her head. No more pretending. No more performing, just love. Raw, honest, unapologetic, and the knowledge that sometimes the best things begin in the middle of a storm if you're willing to step out into the rain. They didn't need more, they had everything.